Okay, so here we are live, hoping this signal coming through and it's all working great for us. I want to talk today about how to keep your homeschooler on task. Now, what I really want is to ask and answer questions. There's a little delay in the system. So if you have a question that comes to mind, throw it out there. And, any comments, things you like, all that fun stuff, heart, stars, whatever. Um, all that stuff's great. But what I'm hoping to do is just, especially during this virus, every day, taking a little while and addressing something in homeschooling. This was Jody's idea. I don't know what uh, are all the hottest topics out there. I have all kinds of stuff I'd love to talk about, but your questions drive that. So don't dismiss it. So this question: how to keep your homeschooler on task? Now, what I can promise you is I'm not going to say what you think, and I'm not going to say what is commonly said out there. I might on occasion, but for the most part, the way I think about things is different than what's going on. That's part of why we were able to school our 5 kids from birth all the way to college in 30 minutes a day. I mean, after they learned to read, they spent 5 hours or more. We spent 30 minutes. We were around the house. We might be reading or something, but of actual time spent having to make the homeschool work, whatever it was, solving math problems, grading, writing, it doesn't matter, keeping up with stuff. It was about 30 minutes. And by the way, that 30 minutes was shared. I was about 10 minutes. Jody was 20. Okay. So if I'm off by 10, I might be, but not really. Look, your child, how to keep your homeschooler on task is a very important question. And if you don't think about it right, you're not going to come up with a good solution. So I'm going to give you a couple of stories that will relate to how to keep your homeschooler on task. The first is in, by the way, I see a question. This is awesome. So I'll get back to you in a little bit. Let me share these stories. So the first is I was a scout. All my boys were Eagle Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. Their uncle was an Eagle Scout. Just one of the traditions that we had and pursued. And when I was a teen, I worked at scout camp this summer, and I worked as a lifeguard. I also lifeguarded in my hometown. So it's just in summers, that's what I did. I swam a lot, was certified. So as a lifeguard, we had at camp, now at this camp, Camp Comer, in the northeast part of Alabama near Mentone, north of Fort Payne. This camp was on a lake, and so the docks and the swimming areas and all were on a lake. And what we basically did is we'd give them all two things. We'd give them a swimming test, all the Boy Scouts at the beginning. They were going to be there for the week. Different troops came in. And we give them a test, and we figure if they were a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, or something like that. And then we give them little buddy tags. And the way it worked was you always swam with a buddy. So you couldn't check in alone. You didn't swim alone. You had a buddy tag. And periodically, you'd have a buddy check. We'd blow the whistle, buddy check. You got to get to your buddy, hold your hands up. We'd count them, make sure it matches the board. And we never lost any kids that way. We carried that to the beach with our kids, and we had buddy checks. So they couldn't go swimming in the ocean without a buddy. That was the way we more or less kept them all alive. So staying on task, that's story one. Story two is Miss Scarlett, our Doberman. At one point, the house we lived in, we had this small backyard with a little concrete border around it, like a little sidewalk almost, about the size for a Doberman. And it was a boundary on this small backyard, and it went to a wooden fence, cedar fence or whatever. And Miss Scarlett had torn up the grass. She had turned long ways, and her body would go out into the grass beyond the cement, and she had torn it up at one spot. And the one spot was where she sniffed through a knothole in the fence. So she was smelling the outside world, as dogs are wont to do. And so in her smelling, she would always check that spot. Her feet would get out in the dirt and tear it up. Well, I was sitting there trying to figure out what to do. And, I could get on to her, which I did. I could set up a boundary around that so she wouldn't get on the grass. And I thought about that, getting onto her, setting up boundaries, something like that. Could not care. Or what I actually wound up doing, I was going through some training that made me think about it a little differently. I'm going to show you what the principle was. And so what I did is I went and I took a hammer and I tapped out that board, and I tapped out another one that was lined up on a chimenea, so she could step on the chimenea or the brick pad or whatever was there. I didn't care. And I swapped those boards. So the knothole changed to a different place from where it was. And in no time, she found the knothole and was there where she couldn't tear up the grass, and the grass grew back. Ta-da. What I've just told you is really all you need to keep kids on task. But here's the problem. When kids are not on task, it is related to how you frame the problem, how you really look at it. Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to show you how to do this, and you might not like it, okay? So I got to tell you that. You may want something else, and if that's true, don't worry about it. You may just need to discover you don't want to keep them on task. So sometimes we think it's about motivation, which that's part of it, their responsibility, etc. But I would say mostly it's about the problem we generally have as humans, that we have some felt need out there, something we want or want to have happen or don't want to have happen anymore. And that's where we perceive it, we feel it. But the real need behind it is something different. So even on a basic level, I've found with myself, sometimes I feel like I need to eat, but in truth, I'm actually thirsty. So I would eat, in the old days, I would eat a lot of cereal. I still eat cereal, but I'd eat a lot of cereal, getting the milk. I was thirsty, but the cereal came along with it, and so my weight went up a little bit. So that's the difference between a felt need and a real need. And you can do that too with what you're trying to do with your kiddos. So what I want to do is try to give you a way to think about problem solving just for a moment with how to keep your homeschooler on task. And it works like this. There are no problems. My conviction is there are no problems on the planet of any kind, ever. Nothing you could name is a problem. There are no problems. Until somebody wants something. So as soon as somebody wants, somebody else's land or country, there's no problem between the countries. But then when they want it, it becomes a bit of a problem, right? Your car being out of gas might not be a problem at all. If you don't want your kids driving it and it's out of gas, that's great. If you want it to have gas in it, it's a problem. You go down the list. Whatever you can think of that might be a problem is actually, right now with the coronavirus where we live right now, it's a problem because we don't want people to get it. However, there's a large population that largely has, best I know, 0% chance of being harmed. Virtually the 18 and under, really 45 and under. I'm not suggesting go out and get it or anything like that. I'm just describing an issue. Whereas 75 and up, 65 and up, for sure 75 and up, much higher odds of it going bad and awry. So we don't want our elderly to die or suffer. But even understanding the problem that way changes it in terms of what you want. If you don't want anybody to ever get the coronavirus, that is going to be a problem because you're not playing inside of reality. So these are just illustrations. I care about how to keep your homeschooler on task. And when you think through what you want, it's a big help. So imagine for a second here that let me just guess, you want your child to be a self-starter and keep on task for themselves. That could be it. You might want to not have to remind them all the time, nag them to stay on task. You might not really think being on task is the issue, but you do want them to learn in some freer style approach. And they're not even doing that. They're spending time gaming instead of studying, even though you give them freedom. So whatever you want is going to affect this conversation or the solution that you're going to come up with. So I want to throw out 3 little principles that I've learned that you might find uh, helpful. And the first is what's called the path of least resistance. This is a bad thing for some reason in our world, but it's not. It's just a true thing. So when the Army Corps of Engineers redirects a river path, they change the bottom of the path so the water will naturally go in that direction. When you understand the nature of human beings and people and the environment, that things follow the easiest path. We walk through doors. We don't crush ourselves through walls to get in a room. It's easier. It's a path of least resistance. So when you think this way, you'll start thinking about, how can I make the easiest thing for my child to do what I want them to do? How do I make it easier for them to do their work than not do their work? How do I create a path of least resistance? So this can vary with a person's own motivation, but that's what you're looking for. How do I set it up to make it so they're swimming downstream? Number 2 is you can't fool Mother Structure. So what I mean by that, one of my mentors, Robert Fritz, taught us, you can't fool Mother Structure. And what that means is the way things are structured will dictate to you. And I'm going to give you an example in just a second. The third principle is that the system's your solution. You really want to look and focus on the system, because whatever's going on in your homeschool is happening because of the way you have it set up. And it's not a bad system. It's a very good system at producing whatever you're experiencing. So systems that produce kids that don't really learn much are really good systems at not helping kids learn a lot. If you see kids really learning and developing discipline, it's probably a good system to learn discipline in. It may not be a good system for fun, but you can look at the result and tell what the system's like. So I was telling Jody when we were talking about this a little while ago, I describe it this way. I put it all together that, let's take an imaginary scenario that you want your children to walk around in the study room bent over. Let's just play this game. So you want them bent over. You want them hunched down, right? Well, how might you accomplish that? One is you can nag them, bend over, bend over. I don't know what it is with those kids. It's just not natural for them to bend over. They keep wanting to stand up straight. Well, one or two of them may be naturally hunched a little bit, or one of them might like to look for things on the floor, so half the time they're okay. That would be one strategy. Another one would be you could have hunching classes and try to get them set up. You could have a monitor, not you, but one of the other kids gets to be monitor for a day and give out demerits for people not hunching over and make them do yard work or something. You could do a lot of these things, but I'll tell you the easy way to do it. All you need to do is have a 4-foot ceiling. If you have a 4-foot ceiling, your older kids are going to walk through there hunched over. Why is that? Well, it's because you simply have set up a path of least resistance now that is getting what you want and not getting what you don't want and not what you want. So I want to give you some examples and then see what you might do with it, okay? So we began to think this way. And my greatest superpower, besides that I can read, is that I'm lazy. I really attribute more success in my life to being lazy than to anything else, because I just don't want to work that hard. So I taught myself how to memorize things quickly, because memorizing it slowly is painful. See how that works? So let's take these 4 little examples and see if these resonate with you. And so what we're talking about is how to keep your homeschooler. I'm seeing nice things like people loving the channel. I've got this long question we'll look at for a little bit, how to keep your homeschooler on task. Systems, structure, how do you set the game up? Because the way you set the game up will make all the difference in the world. I'll give you one more little example. Let's say you, as a family, want to discussions together or debrief a movie or study the Bible. We would do that. And so what we would do is we'd sit everybody kind of in a circle around our little living room area, and we would talk, right? Imagine if we just set the chairs up facing outward, not inward to the circle, but outward. And everybody had to sit facing outward. And we tried to do a Socratic discussion or a Bible study. How would that work? And that's because you can't fool mother structure. So the way you have it set up is probably interfering. If your kids aren't tasked, it's interfering with helping them to find staying on task the easiest thing to do. So I have down here, get up time, school start. So how do you get going? Some people start later, some people start earlier. Some are inconsistent. That rarely works well. You know, schools and jobs and governments and appointments and all have figured out that you kind of need a start time. So if you flex every day, that's probably going to create a pretty inconsistent system. You're probably behind a lot. Not picking on you. I'm just saying if that's what you want, that's a great strategy. But if you really want some consistency, you're probably going to have to start on time. Well, a lot of people, we did in the beginning with the kids, getting up time. So Jody, I think usually I'd do it too. I used to get the kids up. We go tell them to get up. And it's time to get up, get ready for school or whatever. And so we would tell them, and some you'd have to go back to and say, I'm not kidding, you got to get up, turn on the light, something like that. And that game was very intensive for us. And then starting on time was a bit of a problem because some were down and some weren't. And we'd let them go, and then the others would be behind and throw off the day. And they couldn't do things together. They're filming a movie, and one was late, and they couldn't do them. So what happened because of my gift for laziness, I finally just realized, or Jody and I both, talking it through, decided, hey, why are we in charge of getting them up? Why don't we give them that responsibility? And why are we in charge when they start? Why don't we give them that responsibility? So we wanted them to, on their own, get up and start on time on their own. And so how do you pull that off? And the answer is you pull it off simply by telling them that the way we did it, school started for us at 7:30. You can have a different time. And you can't start until everybody's there. And if you can't start, you can't finish by lunch or so, right? So the longer you wait. So what that did is it motivated, since everybody was in it, all the ones that were diligent to get up, usually older ones, would make sure the younger ones would get up. So they can't start until they're all there together. That's setting up a structure. So it was much easier for the kids to just get up and be there on time than it was to battle with their siblings and get in trouble and be late and have people getting onto them. Got it? Number 2, going to bedtime. You have a problem with this? Going to bedtime? I mean going to bed for the kids, right? Not for you. You may have that problem too, but the kids going to bed. So we had bedtimes for all the kids, and they varied. As you got older, we had a little system. As you got older, you could stay up later, movement towards teen years and adulthood. And a little specialness and respect for age and whatever built in the system. It didn't work that well because the 2 younger boys always waited for Forrest to come in and tell them stories every night, so they would stay awake. But as we wrestle with it, what we've watched is the kids get up, they need water, they need this, they come out, they keep coming out of their bedroom instead of giving us a settled evening and them settling in. So what we did is we set up a structure, which was like this. We told the kids we didn't care if you slept all night. And that's mostly true. We really didn't. What we cared about is them staying in their bed. You can be awake, you can think, you can do stuff, you don't disturb the house. But we want you in your bed all night. Get the idea? And here's what would happen. They'd be in their bed, and some would stay up later, some didn't, some would talk, some whatever. Most of them just went ahead and went to sleep. Because the key was having them stay in their bed. And then they couldn't get out until a certain moment, whatever that was. But that's a structural solution, so we're not nagging or doing anything. We're making one thing the issue. Are you on your bed? You don't have to be asleep. We don't make it that issue. I can't go to sleep. Yeah, so that's not our problem. The question would be if you can't stay in your bed, right? Okay. Third example, spelling and capitals. So a lot of kids we've worked with, I've watched will have challenges with their writing, the first letter after a period is capitalized, so they might miss that, or sometimes names, but even that's a little awkward. Or certain spelling problems. Spelling is a little more involved, but it's still a good example. So the question is, what strategy or structure or path of least resistance, how do you make this thing, how do you set it up so what you want is what happens? And I would say it's pretty simple. So what I would want is to remove one writing problem at a time. So if we made the capitals thing go away forever, it's never a problem, right? So I might, in grading the kids' writing, make nothing else the issue. Don't care about commas and grammar and all kinds of stuff that could be all in there. But if they're just learning, if we just nail down one thing, we're going to have one thing we focus on this week or the next 2 weeks, right? And it's capitalizing after the period. So you're writing, and then when they go back through and edit it, they can find those mistakes. Spelling, same game. Trying to spell everything right can be a little overwhelming, but focusing on not continuing to misspell the same words over and over. So if you started making a list of misspelled words that were misspelled, 3 times in a week, let's say if that's a lot, or 5, and those were the words that you worked on, maybe it's just 5 words, but if you really learn to spell those 5 words, guess what? They don't come up. They're not a problem anymore. So it'd be a system of systematically removing spelling mistakes. You can do it with grammar too. You can do it with anything. But a lot of times what we do is we reach for way too much. We don't have a simpler system, strategy, structure to help make things happen. So, how to keep your homeschooler on task. I said all that to say this. And please write your questions because I'm going to get to them next. What you want to do is you want to create a time limit for each subject. However you do your day, if there's math, how long are they going to work on math? We worked in 2 segments of an hour each. But let's just say it's an hour. If you have them sit down and have a number of problems to do and take as long as they want, you'll get people not staying on task. Because if you have forever, you'll take forever. But if you limit the time and say, look, you need to do your problems in this length of time. And make sure that you give them the right number, right? I mean, an appropriate number for an hour or 30 minutes, whatever you do. And then at the end of that time, let's say it's from 9 to 10 in the morning. At 10 in the morning, math stops, just like in school or work or, you get on the plane at a certain time, so you got to be there at a certain time. It's that kind of stuff. So math stops at 10, and whatever you don't get done, you get to do in the afternoon for homework, preferably before play or in the middle of play. Now, that may sound cruel, but it's going to be cruel for about 2 or 3 days because you know what your child is going to start learning to do? Focus and get them all done. That's the way the game works. When I switched schools from public to private school in my 8th grade year, the first math test I took, I made a 50 on. It was 20 problems, and I did 10 of them perfectly. And then I never got to the other 10 because I worked really slow because I didn't know about testing and time. That's not what in our public schools we were doing. So there's the game. If you set up a certain amount of pages to be read in an amount of time, a certain amount of math, a certain amount of writing, number of pages to write, whatever subjects you have, give them a frame of time which is fair, and what they don't get done, you stop then and you do it later. By the way, if you're on time management, that works pretty well too. Why don't you give yourself a certain amount of time to work on something, and when that time's up, it's up. And you can come back to it later and do some homework if you want to, but you need to move to the next thing. There's the idea. And it all fits these principles of path of least resistance. You can't fool mother structure, and the system is the solution. I use this in business. I use it in life. I use it everywhere. All right, so I've been homeschooling for 25 years, 6 kids. I'm down to my last one who's 15. Woo! Congratulations, you made it. And he is very, very unmotivated. All right, so I'm going to read the rest of it. He's very, very unmotivated. At this point, I'm letting him work on what he enjoys, which is basically lifting weights and keeping in contact with his friends via social media. He plans to go to school for high school in September, but he needs to get caught up on his math. So my question is about getting him motivated and staying on task from now through summer. So what we need is a structure that invites him to catch up on math and matches his motivation. So this is part of the trick in the world. This is part of the trick in the world. When you motivate a kid, you're using something external that matches something internal. So what we know about this 15-year-old, and school will help do that because its path of least resistance will really tell him what to do. And we'll see if he figures that out. I hope it will. It may not. But we got weightlifting and social media. So it looks pretty obvious to me that he'll never do his math if he does all of his weightlifting and social media first. There's not a good way to really pull that off, right? So the question I would have is, how much math does he have to do? He's going to school in September. We're in May, right? So we got May, basically, all of May, June, July, August. So there's 4 months. How far are we going to need to get? And then let's think, how many lessons do we need to do a week to get there? Or I think what I would do is give him a test that would match what he needs to be able to do before he goes to high school. A test. And that test is going to target what he needs to work on learning. And then I'd test him again about halfway through and test him at the end, or test him regularly and just make this test the issue. Now, practically speaking, I think I would invite him to, cut a deal on like no social stuff until he's done his math. Maybe the gym comes early and that relieves a lot of energy or whatever. But it'd probably be lift weights, math, social, something like that. There's got to be some sequence there. Or maybe it's lift half the weights, math, other half weights, something like that. Ideally, he'd get up and do math first, hardest thing in the day, show some discipline. Then he's got the day freed up to do weights and social. That's the context. So that would be the way to do it. But I'd really make everything about the test. So I'd have to figure out a way to test what he needs to know starting school and let that be the standard of it. And you might even cut a deal like that. If you're not to this certain point, we've got to cut out the social stuff. I mean, you've done it with 6 kids, so you probably can figure this out. But he needs to really be invited to make a more adult decision. He's 15, right? So he needs to decide, is he going to be ready for school, and what's it going to take? And it means he's going to have to figure out what he needs to learn, and he's going to have to go through the learning. If he knows some of it, there's no reason to study that, I don't think. He could do some review lessons. But it's not necessarily just getting through a book. It's what does he need to know to do? So there's the idea. All right. Any more questions? I've gone enough, about a half an hour here. And I'll answer questions for a while. There's usually a delay in the system. Sometimes once I log off, questions come in. If that happens, just ask them on the site where this will still be played. And like I said, the whole purpose of this is just to tap into the opportunity to think together, maybe to share some little things we learn along the way, insights, and see if we can't, promote the cause, keep everybody sane in this moment. All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. I'll give it about a half a second more. And otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow at this same time, same place. and we'll see what we can talk about then. Thanks.